Oops, my bad. I was on mute there. Welcome everyone to Remember the 400 Foundation's Hard Talk series. My name is Ezekiel Kennedy, and I am an ambassador for RT400 and today's moderator for this discussion. The best conversations are normally the hardest ones to have, and they're really good because they allow us to move into a position where we can understand one another and reach a common ground or a basis of truth. And so for today's conversation, will be based on Black men and their wellness and mental health. But before we get into that, just a little bit about RT400. Uh, we're a foundation that aims to have Freedom Month as a recognized month across the globe based in August. We're hoping to unite all the descendants of the transatlantic diaspora and their allies worldwide by acknowledging the lasting impacts of malicious crimes and the slave trades on the lives of millions of people across the world, and the resilience of growth demonstrated for those and those descendants. Leading into this discussion, we have an all male international panel. I would like to introduce the Canadian panelists, starting with Christopher Porter, Colin Linton, and Elvis Malcolm. Our UK panelist, Naphtali Rogers, and our US panelist, Avery McNeil. Also introducing a special featured guest, Dr. Jay Barnett, who is currently on his Just Heal Bro tour discussing the mental health of Black men. Welcome, welcome. Thank you guys all for coming on. How's everyone doing?
Not bad.
Great.
Don't be shy.
Doing good.
You're good? That's good to
Doing
hear.
good.
That's good. That's good. And
I like seeing all the melanated faces, man. It's always that's a good looking screen to look at, man. You know.
definitely. But just to start off this conversation, especially on mental health, because mental health has always been a big and major conversation, especially within our community. I just want to ask you guys, just throw it out here. What do you guys think about mental health? Like, how would you define it, or mental illness?
Regularly, if I may jump in first, if you come to me and says, what is mental health? I was just somebody that's sick in the head. That's just straight out, without any background research, just to sort of bring it down. But if you want to look at it in terms of more analytical way, then I would say that there's a few chemicals in the brain that's not firing correctly, or they're just not fitting the normal scope of what society deems as normal.
I would take it a step further. I think there's a huge difference between mental health and mental illness. Mental illness is what we know as the disorders: anxiety, depression, eating disorders, bipolar, schizophrenia, all of those different things. But when you look at mental health, it's the functionality of the three elements that we operate in, which is, if you're looking at it from a spiritual context, you want to say that it's mind, body, and spirit. But if you're looking at it from how we view it from a clinical aspect, we look at the emotional, social, and physical well-being, and that makes up your mental health, right? So I think when we are often talking about mental health, people automatically think that it's mental illness. We all have mental health. If you're a human being, you have mental health, right? You have a mind, you have a body, you process things spiritually. So mental health is the makeup of who we are as human beings. And then you have mental illnesses that are associated to your mental health being compromised, that when you are not physically doing well, it could possibly cause depression. Depression can stem in many different facets, where you don't want to eat, you become withdrawn, you tend to overeat. So it's so many different variations of symptoms and things and other causatives that can exacerbate and push us into a psychosis, into a psychotic state, rather. So just wanted to kind of give context. That way people, when they hear mental health, everybody think, oh, it's somebody with mental illness. No, it's a huge difference.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, even to that same point, like how you mentioned, like mental illness it could be very particular, like how you had mentioned about depression. Like that's that's a deep, like seated, like unaddressed, like something was not addressed in that kind of, created this space where it's like, you can get yourself deep into those kind of spaces. But like, we all really should be involved in mental health, like all of us. Like, to be involved in mental health is just like maintaining, because life. I was actually just talking to my daughter. I got a 6-year-old daughter, and I was having this conversation about like, she was having this issue at school, right? And I'm telling everybody this story, but she's having this issue at school with these kids because she's like she's in grade 1 and she's reading like grade 3 level books. And so the other kids will come to her and ask her certain questions, and like, they'll come to her as like, can you help me with these words? Like, they know that she is advanced in what she's doing, so they're coming to her. She's getting frustrated because it's like she's spending all these time helping everybody else, but it's like, man, I'm trying to read my book over here. I'm trying to play with the toys. Like, this other stuff I want to do, right? And she's getting frustrated, and I'm like, listen, like, what kind of space so do you like say like yesterday to homie when he comes to you and asks you to do certain things? And she's like, yeah. I'm like, okay, so you're creating a space to where you're inviting that, like, you're not addressing that to try to involve that, because at the end of the day, you really can't. I'm all for like agency and like, how am I, like, what power or what leverage do I have in a situation? And at the end of the day, you can't control nobody in this life. You only can control yourself. So it's always about like what you're gonna do. Like, what are you doing in order for you to navigate that situation? And even like to like a learning it like perspective as well. Like, what ways was I involved in order for me to get into this space, and then addressing that. And that kind of is to the point of just like mental health and just like a constant thing, because it's like, when things is like death and suffering is something that everybody has to go through in life, like every single last person. So it's just like something that you have to be cognizant of, to be able to identify what it is and what it's not. And especially as a man, like with this talk about like men's mental health, like that's a very like healthy perspective to look at a lot of things. Like, how did I put myself, like, how was I involved in this? Like, what are the steps in order for me to get out of the situation? How do I have leverage in the situation to learn from it and to like evolve and expand my capacity for certain things? So that's what I think. I didn't mean to go on a tangent.
You touched on a lot of things.
Yeah, I know. My bad.
I was going to jump in on to say mental health would be just a state of being. And again, if you're looking at the sickness part, then you could say there's a scale where you go from maybe blitz all the way down to depression to suicidal. There's a scale that you can gauge yourself to see how well you are in terms of, am I sick or am I okay? Am I feeling depressed? Am I in euphoria? Like, am I feeling good? So there's a scale that you can actually use to determine the illness in that area, actually.
Mm.
That's good. That's good. That was.
I just want to add that it's really a state of your emotion and psychologically, like, just your overall well-being, your social well-being, and how that impacts on how you behave, just how you feel, just how you navigate on a day-to-day scale. So that's all your mental health. So there's many different factors that's going to come in to influence these behavior, whether it be psychological, whether it be physical, right? So then you get into the illnesses. But your mental health is just that state of existence, your emotion, or your thinking, your psychology, whether you spiritual, whether you whatever religion based, all of these things influence. And like I said, the illness is not gonna be the things that is gonna affect those behavioral patterns that you're gonna be displaying on your day-to-day life.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the things I would like to just jump in there real quickly and add that, I am in education. I work in the field of education. And for so many years, the academics put so much emphasis on academics as opposed to social emotional. But now, over the last, I'd say, 15 years or so, the educators have realized that social emotional is very important in the whole development of the whole child. So that's what I wanted to add about that.
Yeah. Could I just add something quickly as well? Just going off of what Elvis said, he spoke about it being like a scale, and I think mental health it is a scale and it's a spectrum as well. So I think a lot of the time in this generation as well, sometimes people will feel sad or they might feel stressed, and they'll diagnose themselves. You know, they'll say, "Yeah, I'm depressed." But I think, you know, an emotion like that is something that everyone is going to feel. Sorry, so you can't feel an emotion like that and diagnose yourself. I think, you know, the scale or the spectrum starts with feeling, you know, that emotion. So you might feel stressed or feel sad, but, you know, does it persist? If it does persist, then yes, it might move on to being, you might be depressed, or you might have anxiety, and it might go further. So I think, yeah, as you said, Elvis, it's definitely a scale and it's a spectrum, and it's important that we don't diagnose ourselves too early on, you know, in that spectrum.
Hmm. I think you guys all make really good points. Just to springboard off of Dr. J, your definition, which I think I resonate with a lot because of my educational background. I think a lot of the times mental illness could be such a challenging thing because of the multiple avenues that it consists of, as well as you're dealing with the emotional landscape of an individual, which is impacted by so many factors, whether it's the culture you're coming from, the society that you live in, or even the educational background that you hail from. And which makes it such a really good conversation, even like to be here today and just to discuss everyone's unique perspective and where you're at in your life, from the young all the way to the more senior folks. But one thing that I want to ask you, lot, because I know everyone here has their own experience, is like how do you guys manage your emotions? I know there's always a conversation, maybe some girls are asking you, you got to be more emotional, you got to talk more about your emotions. Like, how do you guys go about your emotions?
I'll jump in.
Before you jump in your question, I just want to just have a clear understanding, because we, in the definition of mental health, we're still including mental illness. So we still have, I don't think for me, I've actually really got a clear definition of what mental health is versus what mental illness is, because we're talking both. Because even what Elder Elvis speak about the spectrum, are we talking about mental illnesses when we talk about the levels of that's from high to low? Is that illness or is that mental health?
So
So you
to
see,
touch
that's
on
what I'm trying to
yeah, I see
separate
what you're
the
saying.
two. Yeah, before.
So to touch on that, when we're speaking about mental health, we're talking about it's a very broad subject which includes so many different faculties, like I mentioned before. But we classify it, or society will classify it as an illness when it reaches a certain level of excessiveness, whether it's excessive sadness, whether it's excessive anger, whether it's the inability to manage those emotions, etc. In that aspect, you're looking at more challenges when it comes to processing yourself, displaying, or even showing up when it comes to just your day-to-day activities in your life. So it becomes an illness when you're displaying or you're expressing just certain levels of emotion that's not really to the norm, or that seems to cause you a lot of challenges. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
But on that note though, in terms of emotions, like how would you lot manage yours? Or how would
I'll
you
jump in
manage
first.
your emotions?
I think for me, well, firstly, I think this question is very personal. I think it changes, you know, person to person. It's quite subjective. But I'll speak on my experiences, you know, with dealing with negative emotions. In my opinion, I think self-awareness is key. So when you do feel stressed or maybe you feel sad, for me personally, I like to recognize those emotions. I like to, understand why I'm feeling that way. What's causing me to feel that way. Instead of maybe bottling it up or pushing it to the side, I like to, kind of, go at it head on. Um, and then the second thing that I tend to do, which I would urge, everyone listening to also do, I think having an outlet, whether that's a hobby, so it could be, for me personally, I like playing football. It could be reading a book, maybe working out, going to the gym. I think having a healthy outlet that you can go to kind of get away from those emotions. That's personally my way of dealing with those negative emotions.
All right, nice.
For me, I think it's just I agree with Naphtali. Just having a hobby. So I do like to play chess. I'm not a great chess player, but I'm getting better. So chess. I like music though too. Music, but I certainly agree with you, Naphtali, that awareness is key, and understanding that, hey, you are, going through these certain stages emotionally, and I need an outlet.
You know, Avi, I want to build on that point that you're talking about. Both of you made about awareness, and right now at the church, so I'm having like me and all the guys, we're having a communications class, right? It's a 12-week class, and so I'm really in communication mode, right, with everything, and I'm seeing all the different elements of communication and how there's so many different things, with communication, that there's so many things that is communicating to you that you got to be aware of, you got to be cognizant of. And it's like so many things are communication in you, and like 80% of communication is nonverbal. It's like it's not even about what you say. A lot of the times about, people don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel. And it's like certain things that it's just like you got to feel in order for you to really communicate, understand what that really means. Like some people got to put their hand in the fire to know it's hot. Like there's some people that it's like that. There's some people who could get advice for certain people and, be able to apply that, be wise enough to apply that. And with like communication and dealing with my emotions, it's like, I think the body is a beautiful thing as far as like everything happens for a reason. Like you don't feel nothing for no reason. Like if I'm feeling depressed about something, that's an indication of something that needs to change. Or if I'm feeling anxious about something, that's an indication that something that needs to change. So it's about understanding, all right, boom. Like, okay, this is an indication of something. And it was Colin, he did a conflict resolution class yesterday. And he was talking about, just like separating yourself and really having a clear idea as far as how do I feel? Because you could be in the sauce, and when you're in the sauce, you think you feel a certain type of way. But it's like sometimes you got to separate yourself to really, break everything down and understand what's going on and how you're involved in the situation and how you can evolve from the situation too as well. And like, I think that's a real healthy part to managing your emotions. Like it's not suppressing it, but it's like managing it is understanding what that means to manage it, like not suppress it, but like giving the space for it to be around and to live, to live, because it's supposed to be there, like it's there for a reason, not kicking it out. And then he knocking on the door, and then by the time you let him in, you just ignoring him, and he's knocking on the door trying to get in the crib, like, and then by the time you let him in, he's gonna be pissed. So it's like it comes out a certain type of way. So it's just about understanding what's being communicated to you and processing that a healthy way, because we're talking about health, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's hear from Dr. J. I know everyone's curious about your perspective on this.
Well, I'll go back to what Naphtali, is that correct, brother?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, just want to make sure I'm not saying your name correctly. Going back to what he said, I think for a lot of us as men, the way we were developed, and Avery kind of touched on this, Black boys particularly have not been developed socially and emotionally. So there's a part of us that don't know how to manage our emotions because we don't know how to acknowledge it. And then anything that you don't know how to acknowledge, you typically can't identify it or have a label or have the vocabulary for it. And I think the important thing to remember when we're talking about managing is, I think that we have to think about honoring. So if I'm going to manage something, I have to honor what I'm going to manage. I'm going to care for it. And I think it's important. And one of the ways that I've managed my mental health and manage my emotions, as the question that you asked, Ezekiel, is honoring what I feel and then putting a name to it. So for an example, I think from a lot of the brothers that I've worked with, and being a former NFL athlete, what I saw from a lot of guys is anger. But if I can put a name to what the anger really was, much of it was disappointment. Much of it was abandonment. Much of it was rejection. And I think the best way to manage what your emotions is to understand, what am I feeling? What is the feeling? The emotion is the actual name for it, but the feeling is what the emotion does to you when you have an understanding of it, right? So I'm disappointed, and by feeling disappointment, I don't want to show up. And I don't want to show up because the person who I thought that would show up for me no longer wants to show up for me. So the feeling becomes, I just rather withdraw, and I just rather disconnect, or I'd rather disassociate. So I think it's important that as we're having these conversations, it's like when men come into the space with the Just Here Bro tour, one of the things that I had to do is walk men through an emotional chart so they can have an understanding of what emotion, because most of us only know anger, and that's a very low-hanging fruit. So they didn't know other meanings and other definitions or either titles of the other emotions. A lot of brothers don't know what happiness really is, right? To them, happiness is, and again, I'm going to be transparent. Happiness is being able to get off for some men. Let's be honest, right? It's being able to release sexually. It's being able to get high, or there's some way that they associate happiness with some form of pleasure, and not have an understanding that maybe happiness is what Neptali talked about, being able to play football, and in that moment that he's on the field and he's moving around, he's feeling good in that moment that he's happiness. And so I think the more that we have conversations and dialogue in these spaces, it's going to help men to broaden their understanding that I don't always have to try to suppress or ignore or dishonor or betray myself with this, I'm good.
Just to add on to you, Dr. J, would you say that it would be a state of mind again? Because each person can have a different state of mind in terms of happiness, meaning that I could just sit back and just be reflecting, but I'm very happy.
But yeah, we're saying the same thing. Absolutely. So it would be a state of being rather than an actual happening thing, right?
Right.
Rather than it happen to be something that I have to necessarily participate, or something has to be happening. Because if you think about happiness, right, there's an understanding or a definition that something has to happen for the happiness to actually sort of materialize into itself. But I agree with you. Sometimes, and that's what I encourage, brother, is discovering happiness in the midst of nothing. So no, I absolutely agree with you.
I like that. I definitely do like that. And I think I could definitely resonate with the point of honoring your emotions, and the ability to even identify what you're feeling, because it's very difficult to move forward with someone or even with yourself when you don't understand why you feel the way you do or why you're behaving the way you're behaving. You can't really identify or even relate to what you're feeling. So solid points. Colin, we haven't heard from you though.
Oh yeah. And yeah, just to add to, it's very important to understand the source of this emotion that you're feeling. Like, where is this coming from? You know, what is causing me to feel this way? Because for me and where I'm at in the Israelite nation, I see things spiritual. So I know that we're wrestling not against flesh and blood, but spiritual. So is this a spiritual attack? That's one way to identify the source of it. Because sometimes it's not just the person, but what's in the person that's coming at you. And having that eyes to understand the source of the problem. Sometimes it's not just that the person that is triggering that anger or whatever the emotion that you're going through. So you really have to understand the source. Where is this coming from? Well, why am I feeling this way? And when, as you said, when you identify that, then you're better able to deal with it. You know what I mean? So if your happiness comes through just that, then it's like, is that really where happiness should be coming from? Is that really what's making me happy? Or is just the fact that I'm just having this little moment of pleasure? Because then you realize after you have that pleasure, then you're still not fully happy. So is that really the source of my happiness? So that's one way to really try to manage that emotion, is to understand where it's coming from.
Yes.
You know, I thought that question too that someone put in the chat, can you identify it, or you think you can identify it or yourself, or someone has to point it out? Going back to the young man above me, my name is
Naphtali.
But it's the level of awareness that I think that is critical, because it can be both. And if you're someone who's married, maybe your partner is identifying that there's been a shift in your emotions, or a shift in your body language. Christopher talked about how we communicate, 80% non-verbally. And I think that's essential to understanding what you feel, that even if you can't put words to it, your body tells you, your body begins to respond. And I think when we have the ability to identify that, you know what, for an example, when I got cut, I knew that when I got cut playing football, for me, I didn't know why I felt the way that I did about getting cut, because they never told me that I wasn't a good football player. But what it felt like was my dad abandoned me and not giving me an opportunity to be his son. So I attached that moment of getting cut to another moment, and I couldn't properly identify why I had such anger, because they never said I couldn't play football. There other opportunities came for me to play, but at that time I didn't have the awareness that I did now to identify, okay, what is this sadness that you're feeling? But it took someone else identifying it for me that says, hey, do you think this may be attached to something else? So I think there's moments that we can identify what the feeling or the emotion is, but I think there's also moments that others can. And hopefully you're in a space that's safe enough that you don't feel attacked when it is identified. Because that's typically what happened is we see this in church culture, is correction often brings across offense. Pastor correct you or say something convicting, and to Colin's point, sometimes it's not you, the spirit is agitated. And so understanding these different factors is important, but also being able to be open as men when another brother says, hey man, I think you may need to talk to somebody. I think you may need to, maybe you need to take a break. Maybe you need to take a step back. And I think we need more of that, Ezekiel, if I'm being honest, as Black men. We need more men actually identifying certain things in us, but then as a part of us need to be humble enough to receive it and not feel attacked.
That's really powerful. I'm sorry, I jumped in there.
Go ahead.
It's very powerful because you say the ability to identify, and you can imagine how difficult it is for adults, males, to identify. When you compound the issue of a young Black boy, special ed, 9 years old. I had this particular student who was put in the trash can when he was a child. At 9 years old, he was just now learning that his mother was his stepmother. Well, he was adopted child. So he was going through a range of emotions. So I really do like Dr. Barnett, how you talked about an emotional chart. It reminded me of, when we go to the, hospital, or we see our physician and they say what level of pain you're on. Yes. So that's very, very important for these young Black boys, because he's going through all these emotions, and it's the action is violence. So we see a lot of that violence, and in education system, at least in the U.S., as you know, it's dominated by women, particularly white women. So the knowledge of the legacy of slavery, all of the trauma, intergenerational trauma that's been passed down to children, is really not known. And so they're beginning from what they know, which is very little, to say the least. So the ability to identify that, hey, I have this emotion and it's okay. The last thing I want to say too is, many times in our community, Black community, therapy was always looked down upon. And maybe there's some reason why. We think about Tuskegee and a lot of the medical racism that basically stemmed within the Black community. I just wanted to make those 2 points.
I know, Dr. J, you brought up spirituality, and Colin, you brought up church. So I don't think there's enough information being said about that and related to the mental health and the mental illness issue. And I think that that is a major part, especially for Black male, actually.
Yes, sir.
And I think that if we actually can get that out more, then a lot less of mental illness will happen in our people, because they don't understand who they are, they don't understand their spirituality, they don't understand their culture, and they don't understand who their God is actually. And that's the problem, because they're taking on the stuff that's around them, which is not them actually. Like, for instance, I am from Jamaica originally, and I come to Canada. It means I'm going to take on what's Canada happened. What about the stuff that I have from back home? Where is that? It's been lost. So I don't think a lot of the, you might say, Afro Americans, Afro Canadian, but that's not really where they come from originally. So if they know where they came from originally and who they were originally, I think a lot less issues with, again, the systematic racism and all these things that's happening would actually play a lot less, and they would become much better, a lot less father or homeless and these things that's going on right now. So again, the spiritual aspects of it is extremely important.
I just want to add also that all the system, as you talk about systematic racism and all of these systematic things that are used to keep us at the state where we are, these are the same people we're going to for these emotional advice or therapy or whatever answers we need to what we're going through our mental health. These are the same people that wants to keep us oppressed. So they're not going to tell us exactly what we need to learn to get to that level where we need to be. And that's kind of one of the things that where we're going wrong. So we have people like you, who is a part or who understands us from, because we can relate, right? We're kind of like go through the same thing. Then it's easier for you to use the knowledge and help us to get to that point. But when we go to the other nations for help in our mental health, then we're going to in problems. So just
Yeah.
like Elder Elvis is saying, we need to know ourselves and to deal with us from that point of view, because the identification is one of the biggest issue in fixing our mental health, identifying the source.
That's a very powerful point. Again, going back to education, the metrics that they use are normed for Europeans, basically.
Yeah.
So, who we go to find out, or to get therapy is very, very critical, is very important. And again, I like what you said, Elvis, in terms of the spiritual aspect. When you've been stripped of your culture, your spirituality, when you've been stripped of everything and you've been placed in this culture, I mean, we're still trying to understand who we are. And so to go and ask for help from those who don't even understand who we are, I mean, how beneficial is that?
I think you guys make a lot of great points, a lot of good points. Even I know Dr. J, you mentioned about how society makes it challenging for young Black men to really express themselves, or even to find the safe spaces to develop that thought process to identify your emotions. And Avery, you made a good point when it comes to the educational institution, and how a lot of the structure and infrastructure of our society is based on Eurocentric standards, as well as what is expected for just people in general. And when you put these pieces together, you start to see the challenges that we faced as a people and even as a community, and even how that affects us on a spiritual level as well. I know over here in Canada, we are a cultural mosaic, is what we like to call it. We're in a society where there's so many different subcultures, so many different ideologies and viewpoints. It creates a lot of like noise. There's very few people that can actually relate or even to connect with you on those levels, and just to help bring out the best part of you, especially as a young Black man or a young Black boy, on how best you can conduct yourself in this world. Which brings me to another question. I'm going to throw this one at you, Dr. J. Back to the safe space. Like, how do young Black men, how do they express vulnerability, and what's the experience of that? Like, do you think it's we're given enough to do that? Do you think that's still a challenge that's being overcome? And anyone else, if you have any thoughts on this, definitely jump into that. But that's That's where my mind's at the moment.
Well, when you think about let's start here. You don't get trust until you have conflict. Until you show me who you are in the midst of conflict, I don't know that I can trust you. Why I shared that is too many times in conflict as little Black boys, someone has showed that they can't be trusted.
Mm.
Meaning that you expressed something and you said something, or you took something that was vulnerable, and in the heated moment that conflict arose, that vulnerability was exploited. We see this often where, like with a lot of the couples that I work with, most men are afraid to be open because of the experience that they've had in other seasons of their life to like, well, if I share this, will you use this against me?
Ahead of the lot.
So I don't know that I can trust you. I've worked with every type of man. I've worked with every type of culture. I've worked with Jamaicans. I've worked with Trinis. I've worked with Asians. I've worked with every type of man. Though we are different culturally, we're very similar in function. Every man wants to know that he can trust you before he parts his lips. And most of the times is you don't have to say it's a safe space. You can identify safe. Because if you start telling me that this is a safe space, I know that it's not safe. It's like somebody telling you, hey, I'm a good person. Well, just show me. Let me see that you're good. Let me see. If a woman kept telling you, I'm really a good girl, I'm really good, you should really give me a chance, you're going to be very apprehensive.
Yeah.
Because most of the time as men, we're not credited enough for our intuitiveness. We're very observant. And one thing that we observe as men is behavior. So if I saw you share someone else's business over here, or I saw a teacher go and tell something that was happening with another kid, I'm not opening my mouth to Mrs. Johnson. I don't want my business out there. So I'm providing this context to land the thought that in order for vulnerability to happen, there has to be trust. Now, here's the other part. There is a risk in being vulnerable. There are no guarantees that someone is going to safeguard. And lastly, I'll say this. But when you get to a place that you are okay with your vulnerability and the things that are vulnerable to you, even in a space that you may have felt safe and then you realize that it wasn't safe, it doesn't cause as much harm because you're okay with it. And as I often tell men, I'm very transparent, but I'm very selective on where I'm vulnerable. Because when you say that you're vulnerable, you're saying that I'm open. You are without guard. So we have to help young boys understand, going back to that word, identify safe, identify people that you can trust, identify people that will hold your secrets, hold your insecurities, hold your failures, hold your anxiety. And we fail young Black boys because when they were in school, we penalized them. We did not give them safe. When a Black boy had an issue, we brought him before the class and we made a spectacle out of him, and we're going to call the principal. No one pulled him to the side to make him feel safe and protected. So now that he doesn't feel safe and protected, why would I be vulnerable with you? You've shown consistently that you are not going to protect me. You're going to go tell everybody, oh, he's this, he's acting up in class. He has a third grade reading level and he's a 7th grade student. These things break your spirit. They don't make you want to open up. And I tell women often, when you display distrust to us, we would never open up again as a man. And unfortunately, most Black men that don't open up learn from their mothers that they couldn't open up. because when they shared something, they heard it again.
That's very interesting.
What I want to add to that though, do you realize that this trust is one of the biggest things that they did in when they were creating a slave?
Absolutely.
When Willie Lynch created the formula for creating the slave, we were saying that 500 years later, when we move the shackles from around their neck, they're still gonna be our slave. So the first thing what they did was to destroy the word of trust, because that's the problem with us today. There's no trust, and like you said, the simplest thing a person does, the first thing he doesn't trust you. And even if he allows a 10% and lets you in, he's safeguarding the other 90%. He's not letting you in. He might give you a little piece, but trust me, that vulnerability is not going to happen, because that's psychologically, emotionally, spiritually engraving us as black men. So even today, even when we know who we are, because even within ourselves, some people have come to the knowledge of who we are, there's still the element of no trust among, even though we know who we are, we know our God, we know we're worshiping, we know that there's still that element of trust that we don't even exercise, because that word trust has been drilled, beaten into us more than any other nation. We can't come together for 5 minutes and agree on one thing.
Yeah.
If we're gonna start a business, yeah, it sounds good. And the minute business start flourish, boom, you see the mistake coming. So even for us to even to get to that point of vulnerability, you're only gonna get 10%.
I want,
Word trust
And
amongst us, that word don't exist.
right.
Only up to a point.
So interesting because to me, it makes me think about the role of the father and trust. Because Dr. Barnett, you talked about how young boys are learning from their mothers so much. I just want to very quickly read you some statistics regarding fatherless homes. And maybe Dr. Barnett, you can comment on this. 70% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes, affecting future economic stability. Girls without fathers are 7 times more likely to become pregnant as teenagers. Fatherless children are 29% more likely to carry a firearm and commit a violent crime. 85% of youth in prison grew up in a fatherless home. 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. So when we talk about trust, um, mental health, depression, Dr. Barnett, can you talk a little bit about, how the importance of father physically, certainly spiritually? Can you just give us your take on that?
Yeah, having a father in the home is necessary for the social and psychological development of the child. And when you don't have that, that child is only developed on one side, and it's not a child that's developed on both sides, understanding his masculinity and his femininity. And as I like to say, I mean, if we look like we can go scripture, right? Jesus was both what? A lion and a lamb. So even helping them to understand the duality of who we are as we function, that I can have a roar, but I also can have the competency to know when to stand down. There's a time when I need to be a lion, and there's a time when I need to be meek. And I think a father balanced that. He balanced the estrogen to the testosterone, right? He balanced understanding that I need you to feel your emotions, but I also need you to manage that. And I think what happens is there's mothers are doing it. And so again, this is not blaming mothers, because a woman can't make a man stay in the home. But when the mom only understands one part of developing the child, from a coddling, from a very nurturing perspective. But there's a difference when you have nurturing and cultivation, right? I am also caring, but I'm also developing. I'm also saying, hey, it's going to be okay, but I'm also saying you got to do better. And I think when we have that, psychologically, it really develops children to have a balanced perspective, even in their emotions. I saw this when I was working with young boys. When they had a female teacher, oh my gosh, they would run amok. But when I would come in the room and work with them, they were, they would fall in line. And here's what I learned. Boys love order and structure.
Yes.
When they
Absolutely.
don't have structure, they know there's no love. If I grew up with kids that they could do whatever they want, and the first thing that they would say is like, man, my mom don't care about me, man. She let me go and come as I please. But they equate structure with love. And so when we have kids that don't have the structure and the balancing of their psychological and emotional and social, they only operate from a very dysregulated emotional system. They don't know how to regulate their emotions, which is why, think about it. When you go, I've spoken in prison, when you talk to a lot of men that are behind bars, they will tell you they were men who were not in control of their emotions, and they were very impulsive. And most of them will tell you that they didn't have a dad around. So it's very important to have a father figure or a male figure that brings balance to the rearing process for children.
Absolutely, Dr. J. And the fact that Black boys, men, teenagers, they gravitate towards always looking to see if there's a father figure, a male figure, because that's just how they function.
Yes.
Not that they're not emotionless, it's just that Black men, period, their genetics, their makeup, their spirituality is governed by I need a male figurehead
Yes.
run my life to get where I gotta go, and I won't be running them up. However, the system plays with that and makes sure that there's always a separation in the house. Gotta have no male in the house. Let the boys be raised by the women. Nothing wrong with that, but that's what they use against us to destroy us. So I always said, hey, if we can get just these fatherless children, we got control. And here's what we are, 2025. And it's getting worse.
Also, can I just touch in on that as well? I think we all know, right, that mothers are the first teachers, right? And mothers are great. They're definitely needed in the household. But I think there's only so much a mother can speak to a young boy about. A mother hasn't gone through the same experiences that the father would have gone through, right? So the mother couldn't really talk on, how a young man is meant to walk around, is meant to act, outside of the house. So I think, yeah, the father role is definitely so important, and also the trust as well. I think just in general, I think young men need to have spaces or people, it could be family members, friends, that they can go to kind of release the burden of their emotions. So, and I think if they don't have that, if they don't have someone that they can go to, then those emotions will stay bottled up, and they will end up suppressing them, pushing them to the side. But as Chris spoke about earlier, they're gonna come back and they're gonna haunt you. So I think that trust as well is super important. Having people that you can go to speak about your emotions, super important.
To add to that point, Naftali, and even Dr. J, when we're talking about, it's so interesting how we recreate our childhood in so many different ways, and try to recreate that even when we get older. And I'm coming to that realization too, being a father. My daughter's 6 years old, and I'm noticing certain things, and I'm even recalling certain things too when I was her age, and what was I doing at that age? And I was like, yo, at her age, I was outside playing outside, and I couldn't even imagine doing that as a kid. Certain things I was doing as a kid is just yo, I really shouldn't have been doing that. Seeing her at that age, what was I doing that? And I grew up with all girls too, thinking about just all the points that was made, and how the trust and the fatherness and how that's linked. Because I was talking to my sister-in-law last night, right? And she was telling me about, growing up, and how, a lot of things happen to a lot of us when we're kids that are not supposed to happen to kids. And it's a lot more frequent than we think. And it's I was so surprised to hear that from her. And like I noticed a pattern with the individual, because it's also with people that are close a lot of the times too that it happens. And I thought about the individual, and he had like a roster of who he was targeting. And like predators, like they'll normally target the household that don't got a father in it, or don't have that male, or don't have no big brothers in the house, or don't have nobody like looking out for you. Like so many things happen to you in proxy just because a man is not there. Like somebody would target, like, look at that. That's what you even think about, like, spare the women and kids, or say the women and kids first. It's just like, even if we talk scripturally too, like, God talks about the fatherless and the widowed, like, and how like difficult it is, like how much of you could be easily oppressed if you don't have a male figure in the household. And that just disrupts your whole idea of trust. And yeah, I mean, that's we got to understand the weight of that role, like being a father. Like everything happens for a reason. Like, you need a mother and a father in order for you to even be here in this life. Like that structure is very much necessary. And to Dr. J's point about the contrast to, the opposite part, because it's all necessary. Everybody needs to be there. Everybody has their role to play. And then, we see one element is out, you see how that kind of disrupts everything, like in the future, and that plays on, and you see that recycled spirit like over and over, and it's like generational. And it's like a curse. When we talk about a curse, a generational curse, like it's crazy.
So just to quickly chop in there real quick. Wait, Dr. J, were you about to say something just now?
Oh no, I was just gonna say, man, Chris hit it on the head, man. Yeah.
I was just gonna say,
it was deep. Colin,
until men start realize that they're men and stop looking at the world as though the world is treating women and want to become women, so they get that treatment.
Chris, I mean, Colin, don't go there, man, because
no. But seriously,
I'm saying you own something, because
I understand where I'm going, because the men has the most important role in this life. We own even the children. We own the children. When you own something, you protect it, right? It's yours. But if you don't think you own the children, you think the woman own the children, then what do? You walk away, leave them. They perpetrate that message to us men, thinking that the woman is everything. So we just like, oh, okay, all right. I'm just going to be something else. And look at what is happening. That is really planned against us, to get the man out of the home, give the woman the power. So what do? Then the child is going to grow up without a father, and then it continues. And here we are talking about all these mental issues, because as Elder Ever tell you, all the 90% of the problem that's affecting us are families without fathers. So
Colin, to your point, Colin, to your point, just to quickly chime in here real quick, because I know we're touching on a lot of things right now. There's so many places we can take this. We're talking the social aspects, the politics, the wider grand scheme of things, and I think we can come to the point where we can understand that it's a very, very challenging space for us Black men. Just navigating it and seeing how we can operate in the world. But on that note, I want to quickly talk about just like the solutions, because I know we can always identify problems, but what's so good about identifying problems if we can't find solutions to these things? We have a couple more minutes left, but quickly I want to hear from just a few of you, starting with you, Dr. J. Like, what can we do about these challenges, like vulnerability, expressing, identifying our emotions? What's the next steps? How do you see us as individuals going to a better place when it comes to our mental health and facing our mental illnesses?
I'll keep it simple. I think one, Ezekiel, is what is happening today, right? With what the Remember the 400 is doing. It's these talks. It's a community, should I say, communal approach. That's how it starts, and then also building. I think someone said it earlier, talking about subcultures, but building subsystems, right? Hubs where, again, we all can't reach every man. For an example, for me, like having the Just Heal Bro tour after the book was written and then starting the tour, we did 36 cities in 3 years and we reached 18,000 men.
Nice.
But with reaching those 18,000 men, we encourage those men to create a hub in their city and in their community. That's how it's going to start. When you think about, someone asks this question about, is social media impacted? Very much so, because you have so many messengers on social media that is spewing so much venom, so much dysfunction, so much stuff that just kind of like, it's asinine. And so I think we have to begin in the community, and sometimes the communities, it's made. So how I got started, Ezekiel, I started with 20 boys in 2018. I started with 20 boys. I worked with 20 boys for 6 months. That gave me the data to write the book. So I encourage men, start wherever you are. It may be 3 guys in your church. It may be 2 guys in your coworker. Start having talks. And lastly, building intimate groups that become agencies. Every Monday, 8 of my guys, we get on a group call and talk and pray every Monday at 10:45. We all can be across the world, but we're going to get on that call and we're going to talk. Hey, brothers, how's it going, man? How was your weekend? How's the wife? How's the kids? And then we'll ask the question, what are the prayer points for the week? What are you working on? You know what I'm saying? Does anybody have any business deals that they need to put up? Are there any relationships that you need to, because we're all resourceful. So how we begin is creating these intimate spaces and then allow that to metastasize into the major organizations. And that's how I started. I started pouring into the kids in my community. And they kept coming around. They was like, yo, Mr. J, of course they came around because I was a football player. But when they came around me, I always poured something into them. And I'll end with this. The scripture talks about iron sharpening iron. But here's what we need to understand. You have to touch the metal. The metal has to touch.
Absolutely.
So for the metal to touch, we have to be intentional. So if there's 1, 2, 3, that's 7 of us on this call today, right? And then there's several people watching. We can touch iron with who's in proximity. And it may not be a large organization, but for me, it was helping 2 little boys. And those 2 little boys were in college and they told their school, they was like, yo, we got this guy we be working with, man. He be spitting knowledge to us. Can y'all let him do something at the school? And when the school came, it was 20 boys that signed up. And I met those boys every Wednesday for 6 months, and it changed their lives. They were all first generational college students. And as we know, Black boys are going to college, but they're not finishing. And most of the time they're not finishing because of lack of support. So the support has to be from us. We can't expect our sisters to do what, as Colin said, what we have been given to do. And that is to cultivate. God told Adam to cultivate, build. So it starts with small, intimate groups that hopefully grow into agency, but it has to be communal because we can't do it without each other, man.
You know, let me add to that, something to that in terms of solution. One is you got to know who you are. And that meaning not all Black people are from the same area on this planet. So you need to know where you're from, where you're originally from. You need to know your culture because, again, there's so many different cultures on this planet. And again, some are conducive to us and some are not. And then, of course, the last point is, who is your God? Period. Because we all serve different God. And that's something that most Black men don't know. That they need to know that you're not going to do what these guys do because you're Black. Because not all Black people are Black people. Oh, you have the same color, but You're not all doing the same thing. I know you're laughing, Dr. J. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
So real quick, we do have to wrap it up. There was just one other big question that was being fired up in the chat. To you, Dr. J, because we live in a multicultural environment and everyone has a different source of place of worship or a person they would go to. How do you have a prayer session with people that come from different backgrounds or have different religious backgrounds?
No, say the last part again.
How do you do the prayer with everyone from different worship backgrounds?
How do you do the prayer?
Yeah, that was a question.
For example, if you have people who are Muslim, people who are Jewish, or people who are Christian, or people who may be Israelites, how do you do the prayer session? Who do you pray to?
Well, for from a clinical and ethical perspective, whenever I've gone into a session, I take God with me, but I don't allow God to take over the session. And what I mean by that is, again, I have my own belief, but then when you're working with people who have different belief systems, I think that there should be an honor and a respect there. But even Jesus told the disciples, he told Nicodemus, right? Give me what is mine, but render unto Caesar what is his, meaning that there was a system that was in place. So I think respect is always, for me, at the head, man, because my father's a pastor. I grew up in church. My mom was an evangelist. But what allowed me to reach people is to understand how to connect with them where they are. And not all prayers have to be verbally, because people may be offended, but that doesn't mean that I can't pray for them in spirit, or I can't pray for them. So for that question, I would say honor whoever their God is, right? By respecting. And that doesn't mean that you have to pray to that God. But if that prayer can says, hey, I'll pray for you, because there's people that I prayed for that were not believers that were in my session, and they would say, can you just say a prayer for me? And I would say a prayer, and I kept it simple, but I always asked God to provide them with understanding. Because with understanding, it comes to clarity, that hopefully in the clarity, they see God and find him. But my responsibility was always to honor people for whatever their belief system was. But in prayer, that's a thing that we can take to God and that they never have to hear, because I've seen some clinicians and seen some people get to praying, man, like a really quick story. There was a guy here in Texas that went to a school and spoke. I mean, he literally just started preaching, man, like to the kids. And man, by 6 o'clock that evening, he had made national news. Jeez. Because the parents, and he didn't say anything wrong, but that's just that's the system. This is Caesar's system, right. And so, man, and he lost his gig because the parents like, well, you're trying to save our kids. And he was just talking to kids about finding Jesus, and he meant no harm. And that just taught me a valuable lesson, man, is I honor and respect all men. But if I'm going to say a prayer, I know I've learned how to pray here in my heart for the person if they have a different belief system.
Appreciate it. Now, thank you guys all so much for joining this conversation. I really did like that quote, iron sharpens iron, and the context of another man sharpens his friends. And on that note, though, we're going to be wrapping up. I appreciate all you guys coming out. Thank you all those that are in cyberspace that joined us on here today. And definitely looking forward to having a part 2 to this conversation. It's very much needed for the community. So much gems, so much edifying that was really done in this conversation. On that note, though, until next time, I bid you guys all peace.
Peace.
Peace.